Welcome to the She Leads podcast, a space that empowers women like you to build success in a way that feels authentic, energizing, and aligned with who you really are. In a world that tries to convince us that success means hustling harder and following everyone else's rules, we're here to rewrite the script. This is about success that feels nourishing, not depleting. Success that brings the fulfillment, impact, and recognition you deserve, whilst ultimately giving you the financial power to create the future you want and inspire meaningful change in the world around you. Make sure to hit the follow button so that you never miss an episode, and come and say hello on Instagram. You can find us at she_leads.academy. Let's dive in. Let me tell you a story about one of my clients. Let's just call her Erin. So Erin's daughter has recently turned 13, and it was like as soon as she hit that milestone, the atmosphere in their home really just shifted very quickly. So conversations became very tense, small requests just sparked this conflict, and it was kind of this emotional landscape that just felt very unpredictable. Erin said even the family dog was taking himself out of the room during certain exchanges. It was like the dog couldn't even handle the atmosphere. So what had once been everyday interactions now carried the weight and intensity of, it was like a storm that was brewing. And then one evening, Erin comes home from work and she sort of trudges down the hallway, prepared to have another, oh, we need to talk about your tone type of conversation. So she walks to her daughter's room. She's about to knock on the door. And then she was telling me that just something very strange happened, and she just sort of froze. It was like she couldn't physically bring herself to knock on the door of her daughter. And it wasn't because she didn't want to say hello to her or she was feeling intimidated. It was this very clear message that was coming through her entire body that was just telling her, this isn't the moment. Don't knock on the door. Just walk away for now. And she said she didn't know what this urge was. She would always, when she came home, she would always go straight to her daughter to check in with her. But something was telling her, just don't check in right now. So she walked away. She put her hand down. She walked back to the living room. She went into the kitchen, just kind of started to get on with her evening. But then she said immediately she sort of felt this guilt trying to tap her on the shoulder. It was like saying to her, look, you're avoiding having this difficult conversation. You're perhaps avoiding going to say hello because you're worried that you've been arguing a lot recently. You need to handle it now, because if you don't, you're failing at being a mother. You're being passive. You're avoiding conflict here. You really need to kind of approach her. You need to have a conversation. And I think women often know this script very well, that we are really taught that if we're not fixing something or organizing something or resolving something or emotionally refereeing at all times, that somehow we are failing, we are slipping. And if we kind of leave a pause to just take ourselves away from the situation, we are letting something slide. And if we don't respond immediately, we are perhaps being irresponsible, or maybe even worse, we're being unloving. But all of Erin's handling it now that she'd been doing, this is what she'd been doing up until now. She'd been handling things in the moment. And she felt that when she had handled things in the moment, this had only escalated the storm. And she was finding that her daughter was shutting down. The arguments were getting more intense. It was like this disconnect kind of was strengthening between them. And so she decided, for whatever reason that night, that by doing absolutely nothing, that was what she needed to do. And so she stood by her decision and she just thought, I'm just going to see what happens. I'm going to allow my daughter to come to me. And so an hour later, her daughter came out from her room. She wasn't slamming the fridge. She wasn't stomping to the bathroom. She came and she just quietly sat next to her mum. No tension, no theatrics, just this very surprising, gentle moment where she said to her mum, hi, how are you? I'm sorry that I've been so angry recently. I don't really know what's going on with me. And then they had this conversation, and Erin told me it was the most honest conversation they'd had in weeks. There was no shouting, there was no arguing. And she said, I feel like this happened not because I acted, but because I didn't act, because I created space and I allowed my daughter to come to me. And so that pause, that created the only thing that the situation actually needed, which was space, room. Room for emotions to settle, room for clarity to rise, room for her daughter's nervous system to maybe drop out of that teenage fight or flight mode long enough to actually become reachable again, room for connection to find its way back. And this is a big part of leadership, feminine leadership, that we actually very rarely, I think, speak about. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to actually stop doing anything at all. Not because we're avoiding things, not because we're indifferent or we don't care, but because we understand that not every moment is a moment for action. So if you are somebody who perhaps feels the pressure to act, even when maybe every cell of your body is whispering, just wait a second, pause for a second, then this episode is for you. I am Dani Watson and welcome to She Leads. Hello, ladies, and welcome to a brand new episode. Now, if you've ever found yourself answering work emails whilst standing in the kitchen eating hummus straight from the container, you're probably not alone, and you probably already understand the cultural obsession with doing, multitasking. We live in a world that treats busyness like a personality trait and overextension like a badge of honor. And I think most women I know can't actually sit down without a small internal alarm going off insisting that they should be doing something productive. Replying to a message, folding laundry, booking that flight, initiating a difficult conversation, scheduling appointments, just mentally rehearsing perhaps the next 5 years. Stillness feels suspicious. Now, that underlying belief is simple. If you're not acting, you are falling behind. But we need to understand that constant action does not necessarily equal progress. Often it just equals exhaustion. And when it comes to manifestation and feminine leadership, constant action doesn't just block clarity, it also blocks our results. Now, most of our compulsive doing, it doesn't actually come from alignment, it comes from discomfort. Not knowing feels unsafe. Waiting feels irresponsible. Silence or stillness, it feels like we're failing or something must be wrong. So we spring into motion, not necessarily because the situation needs our action, but because we need relief. We need to act to escape the discomfort of not acting. And this is how we end up in this masculine coded performance mode, where we're using action as proof, action as our identity, action as self-worth. So the assumption here is if I'm visibly doing something, no one can accuse me of dropping the ball. Which I kind of think is pretty ironic considering half of the things that we rush to do were never actually our balls to carry in the first place. So there is this rise of what I refer to as false movement. So false movement, you've probably done some of this, maybe even today, where it's that rush to simply act because acting feels safer than facing the unfamiliar sensation of a pause. So maybe it's sending that midnight email. So you're in bed at night and you think, I'm just going to send that email now. Now that email wasn't urgent, but just resting and relaxing into sleep kind of feels like you're slacking. You kind of tell yourself, I've got a couple of minutes here. Before I switch off for the evening, I'm just going to send that email quickly. Just tick that thing off my to-do list. Or maybe it's the premature conversation you have. So launching into a we need to talk kind of conversation with your partner or your child whilst emotions are still highly flammable. The outcome is that there's tears, there's defensiveness, and you muttering, well, that just didn't help at all. Maybe it's a pathological yes. So it's agreeing instantly to a request. This is my toxic trait. I've got a lot better at it, but I am just somebody that will say yes to things without necessarily thinking it through. And not always because it's aligned, but because pausing kind of feels like I'm being difficult or, God forbid, you have your own boundaries. Or maybe it's the checking spiral. This is where you refresh your inbox, then your WhatsApp, then your voicemail, then your inbox again, then you scroll on social media. And it's just kind of like going through the motions of doing all of these things. False movement, it looks kind of productive. It even maybe feels reassuring. It's like you are gripping the steering wheel tightly, but the car is actually parked. So you're not actually moving anything forwards. Now, this false movement, it actually blocks our manifestation. So manifestation, it requires clarity, it requires energetic alignment, coherence, three things that completely evaporate the moment you are spinning in panic mode. So when you're rushing, you're accidentally sending out the message of mixed signals, of frantic energy, of misaligned decisions, forced timing. Maybe it's agreeing to really terrible ideas and you later wonder, who was I yesterday and why did I say yes to that? Now, the universe responds to your energetic state, not to your to-do list. So if your energy says, I'm desperate, I'm stressed, I'm unclear, you're not magnetizing clarity or ease. You're magnetizing more opportunities to be desperate and stressed and unclear. Manifestation, it needs space to land. So false movement, what it does, it fills that space like, kind of like, let's say you've got an interior decorator who's a bit overzealous and insists on furniture in every corner. And you go into this room, which could be very beautiful, but it's very cluttered with all of this unnecessary furniture, too many chairs, too many sofas, too many ornaments. That's kind of what false movement is like. It's kind of filling that space too much. It doesn't make the result any better. In fact, it can actually make the result a lot worse. Now, non-action, if we think about non-action, it's not just sitting on your sofa waiting for a miracle whilst you are, eating snacks. Although no shade if that is part of your process. What I mean by non-action is that conscious decision not to rush into something simply to escape discomfort. So what happens when we are consciously choosing not to act? And so we're not just avoiding here. We're actually consciously, intentionally choosing not to act. What we're doing here is we're creating space for your nervous system to calm down, for your intuition to be heard, for your emotions to settle, for clarity to rise, for the timing to align, for the right action to reveal itself. And what I think is the most magical thing about not acting is non-action often accomplishes more in 5 minutes than frantic action does in 5 days. Because non-action, it keeps you anchored in alignment rather than scattered in panic. Now, we were trained to equate success, leadership with motion, to equate productivity with our worth. If we add urgency into things, it makes us feel more important, more busy. We equate action with intelligence, but actually leadership, success, manifestation, it doesn't come from doing the most, it comes from doing the right thing. And the right thing rarely reveals itself when you are moving too fast to notice it. So non-action, it's not about being lazy or just zoning out or just kind of avoiding responsibility. Non-action, when it's intentional, is the moment that you stop pushing for things and actually start receiving things. It's the doorway through which the right timing, the right ideas, the right insight, the right opportunities finally show up in your life. Now, if we return to Erin's story with her daughter, that one small pause, that one instinctive moment of, not now, I'm just going to walk away just now. If that pause can shift the entire emotional climate of that evening, of the home, if we think about that story, we can relate it to our own lives and we can ask ourselves what else maybe in your life has been waiting for you to stop long enough for it to finally take shape. Because I think the real invitation inside Erin's story is that if non-action can reshape a single evening, that entire conversation with her daughter, an evening spent with her daughter, what might it change in the places where you've been pushing or forcing or bracing or managing for years? So what if the conflict that keeps resurfacing in your life isn't unresolved, it's simply overhandled? What if the clarity that you've been trying to think harder into existence is already forming, just not on your schedule? What if the manifestation that feels delayed isn't actually late, but it's incubating, it's gestating? What if the timing you distrust is actually precise, but you've been talking over it? Maybe the most revealing question of all, what if the part of you that believes everything will fall apart if I pause is the very part that's keeping things from coming together? And so this is where the deeper work begins. Once you stop forcing movement, you actually encounter an intelligence that doesn't operate through urgency. Instead, you get clarity that arrives quietly. You get timing that reveals itself when you are not looking. You get coherence, the kind of coherence that can't be created through pressure. Now, in the She Leads Inner Circle, this is something that we are going to be exploring deeper. I want to really take you first through the gestation phase. This is where transformation builds in the dark. So I want you to see why growth has this unseen stage. This is the stage where all of the ideas, the emotions, the relationships, the manifestations, they reorganize themselves quietly beneath the surface, kind of like a seed that is under the ground. We can't see what's going on, but something is happening there. So I want to help you see the changes that we were never maybe taught to honor, the invisible work that happens when you stop touching the seed. And then I want to help you understand when complexity refuses to be forced. So when tangled situations, stressful, complex situations, why these often tighten under pressure, and why space, not speed, is the thing that will unravel them. So here I want to teach you how feminine leadership leverages non-interference as a strategy, and why stepping back often reveals more than stepping in and taking action ever does. And then we'll also go into the alchemy of the pause, what happens inside non-action. So I want you to really discover the internal mechanics of what happens here, what your nervous system, your intuition, your timing, your energy, what they do the moment you stop reacting, to understand why the pause isn't actually passive. It's an internal recalibration where clarity and alignment and the next steps quietly assemble themselves. We'll also be exploring why pausing triggers guilt and fear and self-doubt, especially for women, and why mastering the pause requires an inner sovereignty. So you'll start to see how non-action becomes this form of self-trust, of discernment, of your power. And then I also want to bring you into the portal, the metaphoric and energetic portal, and why the pause is the entry point to manifestation. So every breakthrough, every new identity and opportunity enters through stillness. So non-action becomes the place where your inner alignment meets your outer possibility. Now, the She Leads Inner Circle is not just a place to learn information, it's to actually integrate this wisdom into your real life. And so that's what we'll also be doing, integrating non-action into your daily life. So I want to actually provide you with paradigm shifting practices that will help you actually live this truth. So we'll look at things like the discipline of an unfilled calendar. We'll look at things like energetic check-ins, strategic silence, and then my personal favorite, the 48-hour rule. This is where you let complexity self-organize before intervening. So I'm really excited to share this one with you, because this for me in my life has been an absolute game changer. And then we'll also look at somatic listening. So letting the body, not the mind, determine the timing. So this is really where non-action is something that you will integrate. So it's not just theoretically learning about the importance of non-action. I want you to actually integrate this wisdom into your life as well. So all of this can be explored inside the brand new She Leads Inner Circle. So to find out more about the She Leads Inner Circle and to join us, you can head to she-leads.co/membership. That's she-leads.co/membership. I will also make sure that we link that in the show notes. I'm so excited for you to experience this. So I will see you inside the She Leads Inner Circle.
If today's episode lit something up in you and you are ready to build a coaching business that not only changes lives but creates the income and freedom you deserve, then right now you can request a free trial of our She Leads Academy coach training. To get your free trial, just head over to Instagram and visit us at she_leads.academy. You will find the link to the free trial in our bio. I cannot wait to see what's possible for you.